Baby chimpanzees kissed and coddled by humans isn't natural because when the chimps get older and more violent, they end up in what is essentially a chimp prison. PETA's involvement in the new Max documentary Chimp Crazy, next on the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, chimpanzees make lousy companion animals. That's the message of Chimp Crazy, the new documentary series on HBO Max done by the same people who gave us Tiger King. This story focuses on how a chimpanzee for rent party service called Chimp Party evolved into the high-minded sounding Missouri Primate Foundation. The truth? It was essentially a prison for older chimpanzees too violent to engage in the party chimp game. The story also includes the tale of the famous chimpanzee Tonka, star of movies like Babe and Buddy with Alan Cumming. PETA filed a lawsuit to free all the animals at the Missouri Primate Foundation, and that's how Brittany Peet, PETA VP of Captured Animal Law Enforcement, got into the act. There's a raid. There's also the story of Travis, who was involved in an infamous episode in Connecticut. And there's a strange woman who calls herself the Dolly Parton of the chimpanzee world. PETA's involvement in Chimp Crazy on this edition of the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. So, Brittany, good to have you on the PETA Podcast. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
And every time it seems like you're in thick with the filmmakers. So you got a new project here that you are. I don't know, what's your involvement with Chimp Crazy, this film by Eric Goode that's on HBO Max now?
So Chimp Crazy, the main story in Chimp Crazy is about a PETA Endangered Species Act lawsuit on behalf of a number of chimpanzees who were confined at a breeding facility in Missouri. And that may sound straightforward, but it ended up not being straightforward at all. So the story over 4 episodes covers the twists and turns of this crazy lawsuit and ultimately what happened. It also tells the story of 3 other chimpanzee individuals and their journeys. I was one of the attorneys who worked on the case, and because I oversee PETA's work on behalf of captive animals, this is a world I'm very familiar with. So I will show up starting in episode 2. Yeah,
and that was Leonard, your dog, sneezing. Or
yes, that was Leonard, a PETA rescue who is here overseeing this podcast today.
And he's aware of your involvement with chimps, so he's not jealous or anything.
No, he's very supportive.
All right, so you called it a crazy lawsuit. Is it crazy because it was filed, or was it? Well, we'll get into that. I want to talk about the lawsuit, but this is, I guess, one of the things about the work you do that finally it reaches a wider audience where people know about what's going on through this HBO project, Chimp Crazy, which is on HBO Max.
Yes, it's really exciting for viewers to be able to get an inside look at one of PETA's cases. People see a lot about PETA in the news, naked protests, and protesting at Starbucks by, gluing your hand to the counter, and these wonderful provocative actions that PETA takes. And so it'll be interesting for people to get an inside look at this other type of work that PETA does, this life-changing and life-saving litigation that we pursue on behalf of captive animals.
The first episode, and it's a 4-episode documentary, or I guess it's a documentary series. It's really set up in a very dramatic way, and it introduces in episode 1 Tonka Haddix and her facility known as Chimp Party, which is chimp party. You have parties. You can rent a chimp, I guess, and have them come to your party. Tell me about Tonka Haddix. Who is she? Who is this bizarre person?
So Tanya Haddix comes into the story a little bit later, after Chimp Party turns into the misleadingly named Missouri Primate Foundation. So PETA's lawsuit initially was against the Missouri Primate Foundation and its operator, this woman named Connie Casey. And she had been the primary breeder of chimpanzees for the pet trade and the entertainment industry for about the past 5 decades. We see that part of her business is renting out chimpanzees for birthday parties. And there's a chimpanzee that she uses for Hallmark and American Greetings greeting cards and all of these other businesses. And ultimately, she came under a lot of criticism from PETA. And she changed the name of her business from Chimp Party to Missouri Primate Foundation, which sounds very legit, but nothing about the business actually changed. When we found out that chimpanzees were still being held in squalid enclosures, one U.S. Department of Agriculture inspection report described an inspector being so overwhelmed by the ammonia stench from built-up urine in one of the chimpanzee buildings that her nose burned. And the chimpanzees lived in there 24/7. And so that's when PETA really started to get involved. And we sent in an undercover investigator. And ultimately, a whistleblower reached out to us, someone who had previously volunteered at the facility. She went back and got even more footage for us. And then she ended up being our co-plaintiff in the lawsuit. And now here's where Tanya Haddix comes into the picture. Connie thought that she would be really smart and that the lawsuit would go away if she just transferred ownership of the chimpanzees to this shady exotic animal broker, Tanya Haddix, who had showed up at her facility enamored with chimpanzees. Since Tanya Haddix wasn't a party to the lawsuit, she thought that would moot the lawsuit and it would just go away. Instead, we just added Tanya Haddix as another defendant in the lawsuit.
And did she realize it was as easy as that, or she was really thinking that this was a way to sidestep PETA and the law, really?
Right. That's exactly what she thought. She thought that if they did this, the lawsuit would go away. Instead, obviously it didn't. And so Tanya decided that she would fight the lawsuit. And that's when things really got crazy.
Well, tell me about, because she really becomes a central figure in this, Tonka Haddix. What kind of person is she, and why was she maybe the right person or maybe the wrong person to head up this sort of misnomered Missouri Primate Foundation?
Tanya Haddix is a bizarre human being, and one of the things that a lot of these exotic animal owners have in common, as we've seen from these lawsuits, is that they don't think that the law applies to them. So that was a recurring theme throughout this lawsuit. She didn't think that she needed to respond to discovery requests. She didn't think that anything applied to her. But eventually, as the lawsuit wore on, she and Connie Casey realized that this was not a winning proposition. They were not going to win this case. At least twice during the pendency of the lawsuit, chimpanzees escaped from the facility under Tanya Haddix's watch. And we see footage in the series of chimpanzees just out in the middle of the road. One of them tried to get into someone's car. And that's incredibly dangerous. It's deadly both for the chimpanzees and for the humans who encounter them. Ultimately, PETA and Tanya Haddix entered into a consent agreement, essentially a settlement of the case. And under that settlement, there were at that point 7 chimpanzees remaining at the Missouri Primate Foundation. And under the settlement, PETA would be allowed to transfer 4 of those animals to an accredited sanctuary. Tanya would be allowed to keep 3, including Tonka, if she created a nonprofit, hired an experienced caregiver, hired another part-time experienced caregiver, hired a maintenance person, constructed appropriate enclosures, and there were specifications for all of these things. There were all of these requirements that she had to meet within a specified amount of time in order to be able to keep these 3 chimpanzees.
And did she?
Predictably, she did not. She was required to keep PETA updated on the status of the meeting all of these different criteria. She actually lied about a number of the things. She would send us photos of construction sites, which were not the properties that she owned. They were photos that we don't know where she got. So ultimately, we determined that she was not going to be able to comply with this consent agreement. And we went to the court and got an order that, okay, PETA is now able to transfer all 7 of the chimpanzees to an accredited sanctuary.
And that's really where episode 1 ends. And we're on a cliffhanger because there is a missing chimp, right?
Yeah. We showed up to do the rescue, and it ended up being a lot more dramatic than most rescues because before the rescue occurred, Tanya Haddix went to the press and went on the news saying that she wasn't going to allow PETA to take any of the chimps. And if we tried, we'd better bring the police and we better bring everybody because she was not going to let it happen. So she threatened to obstruct the transfer. And so we went to the judge with all of the evidence of her statements to the media. And the judge ordered federal marshals to accompany the transport. She required Tanya to be at least 2 miles away, and all of these other requirements for the transfer. So it was, I mean, there were dozens of police officers on site on the day of the rescue to ensure that no one obstructed. Tanya was not allowed. Tanya and Connie were not allowed to tell anyone when the time and day that the rescue was going to occur. We know now that Tanya did. It's on camera. You know, it looked like a small military operation when we actually went in. It went smoothly. We had an amazing team of professionals on site to safely move the chimpanzees. Everything went smoothly, except for the fact that Tonka was missing.
Tonka. And we're going to get to Tonka and who he is, because he's kind of like a main character in this whole thing, besides Tonya. But I don't want to leave Tonya quite yet, because she comes out as, how would you describe her again?
She describes herself as the Dolly Parton of chimpanzees. She has altered lips. She has very dramatic false eyelashes. What I assume is a very ostentatious blonde wig. You look at her and you kind of can't look away because you've never really seen anyone who looks like this before. She has a very ostentatious presence, and that extends to her personality as well.
So she's a character and perfect for a documentary.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
All right. So talk about the lawsuit now. What was the law that they were breaking, or what were you challenging this Missouri Primate Foundation, formerly known as Chimp Party?
So our lawsuit was under the Federal Endangered Species Act. Chimpanzees are listed as endangered species. And so under that law, including chimpanzees who are in captivity, you're not allowed to essentially cause them any injury. And that includes both physical and psychological injuries. We've established legal precedent in other ESA cases on behalf of big cats, for example, that these animals require appropriate nutrition, appropriate environmental enrichment, appropriate veterinary care, appropriate enclosures, appropriate sanitation, and appropriate social environments for animals like chimpanzees who are incredibly social. So if you deny them any of those things, you're violating the Endangered Species Act. And the Missouri Primate Foundation was denying most of the chimpanzees all of those things.
And again, what kind of conditions were the chimpanzees living under? Because from the sound of it, it sounded like, because I understand that chimpanzees who are rented out are generally young chimpanzees. And then when they get older, they essentially just get warehoused. So if you don't give them up, they are housed there, within the facilities, and it ends up being a kind of chimpanzee prison.
Well, and it's funny that you call it a chimpanzee prison because Missouri Primate Foundation actually got jail cells from a jail that closed nearby, and they housed chimps in literal jail cells at the facility. So it literally is a chimpanzee prison. And yes, a number of the chimpanzees who were at the Missouri Primate Foundation, including Tonka, were animals who were purchased from either Missouri Primate Foundation or other breeders as infants, and then were either held as pets or used in the entertainment industry. And then once these animals become sexually mature, which can be, just around 10 years old or 12, they become incredibly dangerous. They become unpredictable. They're incredibly strong. And violence is a normal behavior for a chimpanzee. You can expect them to behave in a violent manner, and it's not something that the human body can withstand. And so when people eventually realize that, they end up at roadside zoos, or a lot of people dumped their chimpanzees at the Missouri Primate Foundation.
Essentially abandoned, right? I mean, they can't kiss them and hug them like they did when they were kids or young chimpanzees. As adult chimpanzees, they are just mentally kind of screwed up.
Not for chimpanzees. It's normal in chimpanzee society to be violent. That said, you're right that these chimpanzees are screwed up because they're growing up in such unnatural environments. These are wild animals who have the same natural instincts and drives that their wild counterparts do, to be active and forage and to be social and live in a society with other chimpanzees who understand their language and their culture, not with humans in a home. That's not something that they understand. And we know that keeping them in these conditions causes lifelong psychological trauma. A lot of these chimpanzees have post-traumatic stress disorder from growing up in a human home. And that's part of the Endangered Species Act injury as well.
So after the first episode, the court order was essentially ignored, and PETA got custody, or was able to take custody of the chimpanzees at the Missouri Primate Foundation. But there was this missing chimpanzee. It was Tonka. Right. And so let's talk about Tonka. Tonka's kind of famous in a way.
He is. Tonka is a celebrity chimpanzee. Unfortunately, he was one of the many chimpanzees who were used in the entertainment industry in the past. He appeared in films like George of the Jungle, Babe, Pig in the City, and then he also appeared in a film called Buddy with Alan Cumming.
He plays a role too, Alan, in the film, talking about his relationship with Tonka and his relationship with PETA. Tell me a little about Alan.
So Alan Cumming is an honorary PETA director. And when we were looking into the biographies of the chimpanzees who were at the Missouri Primate Foundation, we discovered that Tonka had starred in a movie with Alan. And so we reached out to him to let him know where Tonka was and to show him photos. And he was dumbfounded because he'd been told after production wrapped on the film that Tonka had been retired to Palm Springs. And so Alan didn't know any better. And he had this wonderful image of Tonka living in sun and luxury in Palm Springs, when in reality he was living behind prison bars in Missouri.
At the Missouri Primate facility.
Exactly.
And so at the end of episode 1, when Tonka goes missing, without giving away too much, I guess, how dangerous was it for everyone involved?
It was incredibly dangerous. We didn't know at that time if Tonka was dead or alive. And I can say these things since I know that this will air after episode 2, where some of these things are revealed. But Tanya claimed that Tonka had died. She claimed that she went out to his enclosure one morning and that he had died, presumably from a massive stroke. And that then she had summoned her husband, who took his body away. And that because it was a holiday weekend, there was no crematorium available. And so her husband built a funeral pyre and cremated Tonka's body there. Now, there were a lot of holes in that story, not least of which they claimed that Tonka's body had been reduced essentially to ash, which is a scientific impossibility. And so when push came to shove and we ended up in court about whether Tonka was dead or alive before he was found, we had a forensic anthropologist, expert witness, explain to the court why that's impossible, and that, you know, there are remnants of bone left over even when you cremate an animal at an appropriate temperature. But we didn't know if Tonka was, well, if he was dead, if he was just in someone's home somewhere, or if he was in some roadside zoo somewhere and that they were trying to just pass him off as some other chimpanzee.
And what was the animal, or who was the animal that was reduced to ash? Was there another animal that was cremated?
Well, that's an interesting too, and we'll learn more about that in episode 3.
Okay.
Leonard is dying to know.
I can tell you
that is a bizarre and macabre twist in itself.
But it all ends up being or feeding this documentary drama, which the nation, or if not the world, seems to be just fascinated by. Does that surprise you at all?
It doesn't surprise me at all that people are fascinated by this story, because as it was happening to us, we were telling ourselves, just that you can't make this stuff up. It was just such a bizarre story, the way that everything unfolded. But that's not unusual for these cases. We're often telling ourselves you can't make this stuff up. Tiger King and the cases that were talked about in that show were the same way. When people think that they're above the law, they do crazy and bizarre things that make no sense to the rest of us.
All right. Since you mentioned Tiger King and Joe Exotic, let us draw the compare and contrast. How is Chimp Crazy like Tiger King, and how is it not?
It's like Tiger King in that the central human character is a bizarre caricature type person who you can't look away from, even though you're repulsed by the things that they're doing. It's different from Tiger King in that in Tiger King, the focus was very much on the humans and on the things that the humans were doing, and the animals were kind of set dressing and a backdrop. Whereas in Chimp Crazy, the story is about the animals and what the humans are doing to them. So it's really much more of an animal-centric show. And it's very powerful in that way.
But mostly because Tonka, the lead animal, was a kind of star.
Yeah, he absolutely is a star. And there are 3 other chimpanzees whose stories are told. In the most recent episode, the filmmakers told the story of Travis, a chimpanzee who was held as a pet in Connecticut for 15 years before he was shot and killed by police after attacking his owner's friend. And I think a lot of people know Travis's story, but the filmmakers were able to uncover a lot of things that we didn't know previously about Travis's story, including that he had escaped previously, that authorities knew about it, that actually there was a law in Connecticut that changed following Travis's first escape, but it wasn't enforced as to Travis. And that's something that we see in Tiger King and in Chimp Crazy. In every single one of these cases, we have federal and local agencies who are supposed to be protecting these animals. We have laws on the books, the Animal Welfare Act being the primary one of them, and the Endangered Species Act, that are designed to protect these animals. And what we see over and over again is these agencies completely failing animals, and a lot of times the animals die because of it. And we see that multiple times in Chimp Crazy. And so it ends up falling to PETA to step in and take on all of these cases. And we really need to see these federal agencies step up. And so that's something that I really hope is going to happen as a result of Chimp Crazy. These agencies are going to get some pressure put on them. Congress is going to ask them, what have you been doing?
And yet you would have expected those questions to have come up after Tiger King. And
they did to a certain extent. And so we're hoping for kind of another bump in enforcement following Chimp Crazy. So after Tiger King, we finally saw the USDA starting to pay attention, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service starting to pay attention to some of the villains in Tiger King. And so that's why almost every single one of the villains from Tiger King are either in prison, they're out of business. In the case of Doc Antle, they're awaiting sentencing on federal trafficking charges. We have actually seen authorities step up and go after these people. And so we're hoping to see the same thing after Chimp Crazy, for the government to finally step up and help these chimpanzees who need protection so desperately.
And one of the unfortunate things is that as the spotlight is on Tonka and the people of the Missouri Primate Foundation and Tonya Haddix, they're in the spotlight, but there are more out there still. Right? More animals. That's right. More animals and more Tonyas.
That's right. Thankfully, PETA has already rescued 24 chimpanzees from roadside zoos and the pet trade. And our work has resulted in the rescues of many more. And the lawsuits that we bring have also deterred a number of people, including one of the other primary breeders in the United States, to get out of the business because they knew that they were going to be next. And they were right. And so unlike the situation with tigers and bears and so many other captive species in the United States, right now we're down to under 100 captive chimpanzees in roadside zoos and the pet trade right now. This is a problem that we can solve. And so that's why we're working so hard to capture the momentum from Chimp Crazy to get as much done as we can to help the chimpanzees who are still out there and suffering and get them into sanctuaries.
And so when this airs, it will just be at the midpoint. But tell me how gratified you are at how it's worked out, how it's come together, and what it can do to help you with your work.
It's an incredibly compelling story in the way that it's told. And, some people will complain about the sensationalism and speculate that that it's giving Tonya Haddix a platform and things like that. I disagree with that. I think that the way that the story is presented and the compelling manner in which it's told, it gets more eyes on it. And that's the most important thing. And what we're seeing is people are taking the right message away. It's crazy to have a chimpanzee in your house. What are these people doing? People are horrified. They're angry. And so we're hoping that people will turn that passion into action. And we've got a lot of actions available on PETA.org where people can take action on behalf of chimpanzees who need our help right now. And there's also a forum where people can contact their federal legislators and ask them to co-sponsor the Captive Primate Safety Act, which is a federal bill that we're hoping will catch the momentum from Chimp Crazy. It would prohibit the private ownership of primates, the private breeding and private commercial trade in primates. So that law would essentially ban keeping primates as pets. And we don't know exactly how many primate pets are out there right now. We think probably about 15,000.
Wow.
And so that's a huge number. And those people would be grandfathered in as long as they registered their primates with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but they would not be able to acquire any new primates. And so that would also be a death knell for businesses of people like Tanya Haddix, whose bread and butter is selling vulnerable baby monkeys to members of the public.
And it begins mostly with having a primate as a pet. And then one thinks, oh, I can rent this out. I can do other things with this pet, or this. It's not a companion. It really is a thing for your business entity. But usually it starts innocently with someone who just wants a primate as a pet.
That's absolutely right. And those people also typically don't realize that after a few years, once that animal grows up, it's really difficult to have an animal like that in your home. They're extremely dangerous. Even the small monkeys, they scratch, they bite. And so that's why our primate sanctuaries are constantly full. And unfortunately, a lot of these animals end up buried out in the backyard with a bullet in their head after they bite someone. It's just a horrific industry. And this is our chance to get this law passed. After Tiger King, the momentum from that series pushed the Big Cat Public Safety Act through. And as a result of that law, after years and years and years of captive big cat populations in the United States ballooning because of the numbers of cats who were needed for the cub petting industry, we're finally seeing those population numbers decline. So it's incredibly exciting, and the same thing will happen for primates if we can get this bill passed.
Well, thank you, Brittany, for bringing attention to this. It's really kind of a hidden problem. The people who have exotic pets, primates, tigers, that kind of thing, shouldn't happen because it usually is terrible for the animals and ultimately terrible for the humans. But with the attention on Chimp Crazy, like Tiger King, maybe it'll help you just end this all in our society.
That's what we're hoping. And we're hoping that more eyes are going to be on Chimp Crazy every week, and more people are going to learn about this important issue, and then hopefully go right to PETA.org and take action.
Great. Well, Brittany, congratulations on just your role in getting this out. And thank you for letting us talk about it without, getting into any spoilers, but so people will watch.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great to talk about it.
Brittany Peet, PETA VP of Captured Animal Law Enforcement. You can see her on at least episode 2 of Chimp Crazy, streaming on HBO Max. It really tells you why roadside zoos should be shut down, and why you shouldn't think a chimpanzee is an ideal animal companion. Chimp Crazy. Catch all 4 episodes on HBO Max and to see what kind of action you can take to stop the practice of primates going to people in their homes, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link to this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Or get this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.